So officially, welcome everyone to this roundtable on academic freedom, Islamophobia, and Palestine. I'm Heather Abu Dieab from the Arab and Muslim Ethnicities and Diaspora Studies, or AMED as we call it for short, the program here at SF State. I'm a recent master's graduate from the Ethnic Studies program with a focus of my studies on settler colonialism and Islamophobia, and I'm going to be kind of assisting with moderating our discussion today. Before we begin, though, I would like to acknowledge that we are on stolen, indigenous, or lonely land. But I'd like to thank you all for attending, and I'd like to welcome our discussants. So we have Saliem Shehadeh, the master's graduate student in anthropology and Arab and Muslim ethnicities and diaspora studies at SF State, and a member of the General Union of Palestine Students. He's currently working on his master's thesis, which explores campus repression through the lens of the General Union of Palestinian Students. We also have with us Reverend Michael Yoshii, who is a pastor of the Buena Vista United Methodist Church in Alameda. Buena Vista UMC began in 1898 as an outreach to Japanese immigrants. The congregation has been in partnership with the West Bank Palestinian village of Wadi Fuqim since 2009. And Reverend Yoshii was one of the founding members of the United Methodist Kairos Response, an international network within the Methodist Church responding to the call for boycott, divestment, and sanctions. He's also the chair of the Advocacy and Justice Committee for the Cal Nevada Conference of UMC. We also have Diana Block with us, who is an author, a journalist, and a founding and active member of the California Coalition for Women Prisoners. She was part of the 2016 Prisoner Academic and Labor Solidarity Delegation to Palestine, which was convened by Dr. Rabab Abdul-Hadi. And she edited a pamphlet about Palestinian women prisoners for the trip, which she has offered us here. And we have also Jennifer Mogannam, who is a PhD candidate in ethnic studies at the University of California, San Diego, as well as, you know, a lecturer in the Race and Resistance Studies and AMED program at SFSU. She's an active member of the Palestinian Youth Movement, and for her doctoral research, she's working to build a framework for revolution in the Palestinian context by examining resistance practices in the 1970s in Lebanon and relating it to questions of power in the Arab world on regional and global levels. So that you will know that we are, the session is going to be taking place over 2 panel times. So we'll be going until about 10:15, and we'll take a nice little 15-minute break, and then reconvening at 10:30 and continuing up till 11:45 a.m. So just a little introduction to what we'll be talking about today. We will be exploring academic repression, its linkages to Islamophobia and Palestine. Of course, we cannot ignore the importance of our session taking place at SFSU, the site of creation of ethnic studies, and the 1968 strike, the struggle for our college, which started here. Of course, these moments cannot be excised from a long settler colonial history or from the 1492 moment. Islamophobia is institutional and structural. That's why we see it at the university and via the government, as well as showing up in media and hate crimes. It is important to note that Islamophobia is not new, did not begin after 9/11/2001. It's not from a period of 15 years ago, but rather dates back to prior to 1492, and it is inherently anti-Black and anti-Indigenous, and it came here to the United States as part of the settler colonial project. Also, when we talk about anti-Palestinian racism as well as anti-Arab racism, these are closely tied to Islamophobia, but not the same thing, although they have some overlapping qualities and some similar roots in white supremacy structures. Islamophobia can also look different depending on where it is practiced. Different contexts and situations give Islamophobia a different coloring, different justification, different purpose, etc. But these structures of Islamophobia, as well as anti-Arab and anti-Palestinian racism, cannot be excised from one another. So today we'll discuss some of the recent Islamophobic, racist, gendered, and sexualized attacks on scholars and students, and the community and academic responses to these attacks. In fact, this critical discussion will focus on intersections of academic freedom, campus repression, Islamophobia, and justice for in Palestine. Zionist and Islamophobia attacks on college campuses have attempted to censor, silence, and discredit members engaged in politically conscious intellectual work. Well-funded interest groups have organized campaigns to silence any critical and justice-centered discourse on Islamophobia, Palestine, and Israeli settler colonialism. Such groups include AMCA, Horowitz Freedom Center, Campus Watch, Middle East Forum, and Canary Mission. They target college campuses as sites of critical engagement. some campus administrations have reinforced and emboldened these Zionist and Islamophobic McCarthyist groups by imposing punitive measures on campus activists, suppressing their academic freedom, and combining that with heightened surveillance and policing of faculties, students, and staff. In the wake of these attacks, some campus administrators have fired professors, denied them tenure, retracted courses, defunded programs, and suspended and expelled students. In response, campus coalitions, along with professional associations in U.S. and international communities, have mobilized against Zionist and Islamophobic assaults as part of a continued legacies of justice-centered campus activism. This roundtable will discuss the Zionist and Islamophobic attacks, connect them to current political environment and the history of repression of political dissent in the U.S., and campus activism generally, and at SFSU in particular. So our speakers today will expand and complicate these statements, and we hope we can use this roundtable as an opportunity for dialogue or follow up on resistance and activism that will challenge these oppressive structures. I would also like to note we did originally have Dr. Rabab Abdulhadi, who we had hoped to join us on this panel. Unfortunately, she's unable to be with us in person because she's been invited to participate in the second national meeting of Black for Palestine. This organization collected over 1,000 signatures of African Americans from all walks of life in the community, faculty activists, current prisoners, and former prisoners against the 2014 Israeli assault on Gaza and the Ferguson-Palestine Joint Struggle Expressions of Solidarity. She's going to do her best, though, and try to join us online a little bit. Yeah. So having kind of laid this all out, maybe I should ask if any of our discussants today have any opening statements or any extensions on what I've kind of already talked about. That's okay. That's why I brought questions. Let me see here. Well, perhaps firstly, I know, Saliem, I'm sorry to kind of do this to you while you're taking on the role of filmographer.
Film yourself. Someone else.
Sure. Thank you.
I know, we were trying to kind of set
to stand it up, but he just didn't work there.
Yeah.
I got it.
But maybe, Saliem, you can kind of open up as this discussion is taking place at FSSU, as part of a National Association of Ethnic Studies and the importance of ethnic studies to this campus. Maybe you can talk a little bit about some of the recent repression against Palestinian students and the structural Islamophobic attacks against scholars and students here on campus.
Definitely. So I think we should start with. Do y'all know who David Horowitz is, or what the Horowitz Freedom Center is? So David Horowitz is a long time kind of very pro-Israel, kind of militant Islamophobe, if you will. So his tactics kind of range as it's a PR war essentially, and what his organization, the Horowitz Freedom Center, along with this publication called Front Page Magazine, do is they write on Palestinian, like pro-Palestinian advocates and pro-Palestinian scholars on campuses and in wider community in a way to discredit them, right? And this is not something new. This is part of kind of the structural way in which Palestinian, the Palestinian narrative has been completely marginalized. Palestinian students and activists and scholars have been marginalized. And so, their work, I guess we should start with kind of what they did, a case example, and then move into kind of the background of it all. But this is kind of the context of who David Horowitz is. And I believe he's also a lawyer is he a lawyer? Or I don't know exactly his profession. He may or may not be a lawyer at Columbia University.
I'll Google it.
Google it, yes. So in October 14th, it was a Friday of 2016, it was in the fall, We come onto campus, and at 7:30 in the morning, we find that campus has been plastered with these really racist, overtly Islamophobic posters of Professor Rabab Abdul-Hadi, and they also smear students from the General Union of Palestine Students, as well as other student activists who support Palestine. And so the posters are really really nasty in nature. You know, there's a cartoonized picture of Dr. Abdul-Hadi, and on it says, you know, Jew hater, essentially equating her with terrorism. And these are not, kind of apolitical accusations. You know, when somebody's accused of a hate on campus, it dictates a response. And part of that is, part of that was also kind of the way in which these posters also depicted what they termed one of the other posters, right, let me just go ahead and describe the other poster. So the other poster was a bullseye, and in the bullseye it had pictures of seemingly, American Pie Americans, right? People with a baseball cap and somebody in a business suit. And then it was a bullseye, and it was Islamic terrorism is going to kill America, essentially. That was the imagery that was reading. There was another one of somebody wearing a kufiya, and if you could just hold it up. And on it they had an AK-47. They were holding an AK-47. And again, it was a threat against America and Israel. There was another poster of a puppet master who was the Hamas political party. I don't know if you all know the Hamas political party. It's an extension of the Muslim Brotherhood. And they were saying that Hamas controlled the Muslim American community, which in turn was the puppet master of the Muslim Student Association, which the Muslim Student Association is an organization here on campus. There was a picture of a theater in which it was an activist from Students for Justice in Palestine, and there were assassins in the back, right? So it was equating Students for Justice in Palestine and Palestinian advocates as assassins of, again, Americans and Israelis. So it's moving within this trope of kind of this clash of civilizations, but this disgusting, very Orientalist trope of the clash of civilizations, one in which doesn't exist except in Orientalist and Islamophobic literature, right? This West and East, myth, right? And so it's a trope that's well reproduced in Western literature, right? And it's a trope that we in the Ahmed program combat, right? And it's definitely a disgusting Islamophobic representation of Palestinians, Arabs, and Muslims, and their advocates and those who fight for justice. And the university's kind of response to this was kind of lackluster, to say the least. So it was actually students who tore down the posters. The university did not tear down the posters. It was students at 7 in the morning, at 9 in the morning, at 11 in the morning who made kind of teams of students, and they went around campus trying to find the posters, because there were, I think, 26 posters plastered everywhere. There were 6 by 3s. There were large 3-foot ones. There were 11 by 8 ones. They were varying sizes, and they were plastered all across campus in actually strategic spots on campus, because they were located on spots that had the most congestion, right? So near the library, by the parking structure, on Malcolm X Plaza, right? The desecration of sacred space. And so the students actually were the ones who went and tore them down, and we confronted administration. We sent them an email saying this is completely unacceptable. Something action needs to be taken now. There needs, the demands were, we need an investigation. We need a public and unambiguous declaration from the university condemning the attacks. And we need to end the hostile work environment on campus, and we need to support the hostile work environment for Palestinian scholars and students, and we also need to support the Ahmed program, which is the only program on campus dedicated to combating Islamophobia, which this was a manifestation of. Not only was it Islamophobia, but also anti-Arab, anti-Palestinian hate speech that you were referring to, and the distinctions between the two. That they're overlap, but they're also distinct. And the university's response was we hear you, but we don't give a shit. Essentially. And President Wang issued out the most ambiguous statement that can be written. It was essentially, a faculty member was smeared today, and it crossed the line. That was literally, like, I'm paraphrasing, but essentially that was the gist of the story. There was no mention of Professor Abdul Hadi, nor of the fact that it was an attack on General Union of Palestine students, the Muslim Student Association, and Palestinian advocates in general, nor did it mention the fact that they were Islamophobic attacks and naming the oppression for what it was, an anti-Arab attacks, nor did it even, condemn, it was not a condemnation of the fact, but essentially saying hate speech happened on our campus and this is not allowed. Kind of, this distinction that we make between saying all lives matter and black lives matter. And how all lives matter erases the oppression and is in fact an act of violence against the communities, because by erasing the existence of violence in our discourse, we're saying it doesn't exist, we don't have to address it, so the oppression continues. And it's in that same kind of light that we see the university's response as emboldening and complicit in the attacks. And the attacks are, as I said, when you're accused of being such a hateful figure, and the university is not responding to you, it dictates a response. They're constructing Dr. Rabab Abdul Hadi, and they're constructing the General Union of Palestine students, the Muslim Student Association, and our allies and advocates as terrorists. And within this Orientalist and Islamophobic discourse that we live in the United States, and this war on terror, when you are a terrorist, it dictates that you die, that death and destruction be brought upon you. Because there cannot be, in the discourse, there cannot be a living terrorist, right? This is what the war on terror is on. So Professor Abdul Hadi is terrified to come onto campus. She's afraid, she's scared. She always has people walking with her because she refuses to walk alone on campus. Because that's what it means when you are labeled as an other, when you're labeled as an enemy, when you're labeled as a violent figure, right? And the university doesn't take note of this. And they simply say, okay, if you feel unsafe, we will provide you with a police escort if you want to call them. But we tell them time and time again that our protection is not found in police surveillance and police violence. That the police are embedded in the Islamophobic and anti-Arab and anti-Palestinian and imperialist and colonial projects. That it's interwoven in it. That protection happens when we raise the critical and political consciousness of our community, of our society, of our campus. That when we see hate speech, we act on it and we tear down the posters. And we stand in not only in solidarity, but in internationalisms, right? That that recognition that we are all in this together, right? That recognition that an attack on one is an attack on all. That we are part, as third world peoples, we are part of a global majority, right? That nobody can tread on us, right? That co-opting
Don't tread on me.
Co-opting but this is kind of a disconnect that's happening between the resistance on campus and the administrators' response. In a meeting with administrators, they admitted, VP Lolo Hong, in a meeting with me, admitted that they knew about the posters early on in the morning. But they didn't act on it. And they said they didn't act on it because they were stuck in other bureaucratic meetings. So they were in meetings after meetings after meetings, and when they finally got around to having a discussion on the posters, they had a long discussion, she assures me. And they decided at the end of the long discussion, they found that the content of the posters were just a hair above what was freedom of expression. So they informed the custodial staff on campus to remove them. At 3 p.m., they had already been torn down by 11 a.m. And that's a serious problem, right? And now the university has, their response has been that the posters have kind of highlighted the way we address, iconography on campus and posters on campus. And it was, so the posters were up October 14th. On Friday, October 16th, I believe, there were white supremacist posters plastered around campus that said no sanction, right? These were in reference to the movement of sanctuary status of San Francisco State University, of San Francisco as a city, and not working with the ICE, not working with the FBI, not working with the police, to survey questions of documentation in our communities and in our society. And they say because of the experiences and they learned from the Horowitz posters that were up, they decided to leave the white supremacist no sanction posters up on campus. And this was a joint decision between her office and the University Police Department. They decided to leave it up because they didn't want to infringe on First Amendment rights. So now they're co-opting our experiences, and they're saying that they're misinterpreting it, and they're saying that, oh, well, this is you're saying that your academic freedom is under attack when they smear you. So we don't want to undermine their academic freedom and their freedom of expression. So we should have to leave it up too, right? So this notion of hate speech as free speech, which is absurd, and we know it's absurd, and we know that when you engage in hate speech, that it's not an apolitical act. That usually, that hate speech is indicative of the communities who are targeted are already marginalized communities. So it's not, we're already under attack. So hate speech is an incitement to violence, and it's recognition. It's kind of reflective of that violence has already been committed against those communities. So this kind of disconnect and the fact that we're not speaking the same language is a serious problem. And kind of part of the calls of action that I referenced earlier are this notion kind of in the spirit of the students kind of claiming seizing the means of their own education, right? That we don't need to, engage in, discourse and an education and a pedagogy rooted in these kind of, neoliberal, really, white privileging, white supremacist models of, all speech is great, even hate speech, right? We don't need to, engage in these models of, disappearing and erasing the attacks against our communities, but we really need to seize, our own education, our own communities, and really establish, a kind of radical liberatory space here, especially in our classrooms. And I think with that, I think we can come back to it. But
I think that we definitely will. Yeah, I think that's a really good point. So, Diana, if you wouldn't mind telling us a little bit about your knowledge on the attack on the Memorandum of Understanding with Amnisha.
Right.
Please.
So this kind of predates the attacks that Saliem was talking about, but it's really totally in the context, and I appreciate how much Saliem laid the overall context for this. I was part of a delegation a year ago, exactly. We were in Palestine. The delegation was convened by Dr. Abdul Hadi. It was a prisoner, academic, and labor delegation, but it was the first prisoner solidarity delegation. And what that meant was that we were focused on learning about imprisonment in Palestine and how it impacted the Palestinian people, because most of us have been active in abolitionist and anti-prison movements for years. And we also had several formerly incarcerated people on the delegation. Two of them I want to note, because it is significant, are actually alumni of San Francisco State. One of them was Hank Jones, who was part of the original Third World Liberation Front battle to establish ethnic studies. Hank Jones had also been targeted much more recently in 2005 as part of the San Francisco 8 case, which I'm not sure, probably none of you know about, but it was a very significant case because it kind of brought back the issue of Black Panther activity in the 70s and re-raised it and actually charged 8 former Black Panthers with major crimes. So this is all important because it is a context for San Francisco and San Francisco State and the actors in this, and part of why I think San Francisco State is a battleground around issues of I would say much more than free speech, liberatory action and liberatory scholarship. And that's where I think the connection is. Anyway, we were part of this delegation last year, and we were privileged to have the opportunity to be in conference with members of An-Najah University. And An-Najah is the first-ranked university in Palestine, and it also, as a result of Dr. Abdul Hadi's long-term relationship, she grew up in Nablus, where An-Najah is located, and has had a long-term academic relationship with An-Najah. And because of that, there is an amazing memorandum of understanding, which is supposed to develop the exchange and academic partnership between An-Najah and San Francisco State. And just to note that this is something that President Wang originally was supportive of, is my understanding, and that was passed unanimously by the International Committee at SF State in terms of like approving of this memorandum of understanding. So it certainly has not been something that, a backdoor or anything. It was like an acknowledgement of the importance of academic collaboration across borders and with Palestine. And I think is a very significant achievement that Dr. Abdul Hadi kind of was an initiator and proponent of. So we had this exchange, we had this conference, and it was really amazing. One of the most amazing things was that we had these former political prisoners who were presenting about the history of their repression and oppression in the United States, and at the same time, faculty members at An-Najah were talking about their experience of imprisonment, because unlike universities in this country where having been in prison is a mark that, well, you're not going to make it to be faculty, most probably. At An-Najah, it actually was part of the experience of many of the faculty members. And so it was amazing to hear somebody who had just been in prison, a few weeks ago, and now he was part of this conference. So we all left feeling like this was a really dynamic and real example of how academic partnership should happen, especially in relationship to Palestine, where the effort to disappear Palestinian scholarship is so prominent and forefronted. So we came back in April, and then in September of 2016, there was a major attack specifically on this MOU by the Horowitz people and the same people who are responsible for the posters, only under a different name. I mean, they have all these front groups and they mix them up, and so they seem like they're all different, but they really have the same origin and many of the same actors. And so in this attack, it outright called for San Francisco State to dissolve the MOU, used much of the same terminology, although in an article, written form, about how it was just a partnership with a terrorist university, and that Dr. Abdul Hadi was working with terrorists and promoting terrorism by bringing people to An-Najah, etc. And it called specifically on President Wang. Terry. So, Terry, come on. Okay.
My daughter.
Another illustrious member, alumni of San Francisco State. So, Terry Collins. I'm his editor. I will make it brief, or I'll wind up. Anyway, I think so. This attack on the MOU happened in September. We did try and mount a very rapid response by getting statements and collecting a lot of statements among different organizations, academic organizations, as well as community and activist organizations, to say how bad this was and what all the things wrong, which, Saliem already articulated the kind of overall language for what's wrong with it, so I won't repeat that. But there was a very significant response, and here again, like with the posters, there was a very lukewarm acquiescence. Yes, we have many academic partnerships. We love them all. They're all great, and nothing affirming the importance of what it means to have a relationship between SF State and this premier university in Palestine. All the dimensions of how significant that was were erased, or they weren't mentioned, and so therefore erased. And yet there had been this frontal attack specifically on that relationship. So we had a call for all sorts of the same things as what Saliem was mentioning, and very much specifically to also defend Dr. Abdul Hadi, who was clearly being targeted in all these ways, and yet there was no upfront defense of her. Or the Ahmed program, which is also unique and under attack constantly in terms of just being not funded and not prioritized. So lastly, I'll just say, so this happened really just a month before the posters. And so when I first heard about the posters, I felt like they were an escalation in the sense that we had actually mounted a pretty, we in the very large sense of the cross the country response defense of the MOU and of the work and this enraged them. I don't know that really is what happened, although it could have been part of it. They weren't successful, at least, although they didn't. They certainly didn't get Wong to. Wong never came out strongly, but the community and the academic response was very impressive to the first set of attacks, and so then they escalated. So that's the MOU context.
Before I move forward, I would like to formally introduce joining discussant here, Terry Collins, who's a member of the Black Student Union, which is a member of the Third World Liberation Front. He's also a member of the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense, and he's co-founder and president of KPOO. Welcome.
I'm sorry I'm a little late. I was looking at the other part.
I think we're all in the same boat that way. Perhaps I could ask Reverend Yoshii to talk about your connection with Ahmed, your relationship with Ahmed, and kind of how you've seen Ahmed's role in the community as well as the university, and how that's developed.
Just to get some background, I pastor a church in Alameda, which historically served the Japanese immigrant community back to 1898. First generation of those folks lived through the Anti-Exclusion Act of 1924 and began to build community in that area. Also during World War II, many of you know Executive Order 9066. Anybody that doesn't know about that? Executive Order 9066. Executive Order 9066 was issued by President Roosevelt in February 1942, which ordered Japanese Americans to mass incarceration, 10 camps across the country. And so in the redress movement in 1988, there was an apology that was issued, and there was a congressional hearings, which then came out with testimonies from, we had testimonies from our community in 1981 that they gathered into reports that came back, and then issued the apology and citing the 3 reasons why the civil liberties were abridged for our community was decline of the war hysteria, and secondly, pre-existing racial prejudice, and third was lack of political leadership, the failure. We didn't have anybody to speak up for us at the time. We had no political representation. And there had been deep racial prejudice pre-existing the war. I think how this plays out in terms of our personal connection with Ahmed and working together is that our community has been the face of the enemy. At a particular point in our history, we've been subjected to mass incarceration. And so immediately after 9/11, you would see Japanese American communities come out immediately in support of their Muslim communities that were being targeted right after 9/11, understanding that people had quickly become the face of the enemy here in a declared, quote, war on terror. And so our communities were working a lot with the Muslim communities to try to support people in terms of being targeted and trying to do education around what is really going on. Just like the FBI started surveilling mosques after 9/11, the FBI came into Japanese communities prior to the executive order. In fact, there was a report issued, probably months of report before the executive order was issued, that said there's no risk here to these people because there's no claims of espionage going on. But yet the executive order went on ahead. So our congregation has also been involved in a Palestinian partnership in the West Bank, which is called One of the Key, and Dr. Al-Bahani and Ahmed Kogan, we've been often in collaboration and partnership to do education. We had speakers come from the village and do education for students as well as for the larger community. And then I've seen in the process of that, in working with and supporting Ahmed, what's taking place in terms of Dr. Al-Bahani being targeted, and also the climate of suppression for students here at SM State. One thing I'd like to comment on is that as we have seen what the posters look like, and a clear targeting of people and conflating student activism with quote terrorism, that the root of all that's going on, I think, and the topic of this panel today is about Islamophobia, Palestine, and academic repression, is that the root of this really does come to the ongoing war on terror. The fact that we have an ongoing war on terror, that is the longest war in the history of the United States, but it's very undefined. It's very ambiguous. And so there's carte blanche extension of the war on terror that has been institutionalized. You look at what we have now in terms of the Department of Homeland Security. The Department of Homeland Security has become the institutionalized form of the war on terror. And then all of the branches that go along with the Department of Homeland Security and the way it seeps in our communities, that really what's happening with students is students are becoming the victims of the war on terror. And I think we need to name that. We need to name the fact that there is no accountability and no checks and balances about what this war is all about. Of course, there are incidents that take place that, quote, are labeled terror, but I think we have to even go back before that and say, how does the label of terrorism even begin? And how do we language the conversation around, quote, what terrorism and what terrorism is not? I also work with Human Rights Task Force in the Philippines, and you probably may have heard, or if you haven't, that following 9/11, the Philippines was asked to be engaged as a partner in the U.S. war on terror. They have then helped increase military aid to the Philippines. But what's happened in the Philippines is that since 9/11, the number of extrajudicial killings has spiked up in the Philippines. Who are the targets of them? Human rights workers, students like yourselves, who are activists, labor organizers, even clergy, which is why we've been involved, because we've had United Methodist clergy who's organizing with the poor people who's been targeted and killed. They have become the targets of the war on terror according to the context of the political climate in the Philippines. So I would suggest to us that the conversation here rename the oppression of academic freedom, but also see that in terms of the larger frame of student activism being targeted by a war on terror. So these posters are actually war propaganda. It's actually war propaganda. Naming enemies, putting a face, putting students and faculty as the face of the enemy in the war on terror, with no one questioning any of the checks and balances of how we're interpreting this war on terror. I'll stop there, but I want to maybe some other things I'll bring in.
Let's see. Well, I think another, thinking about like the historical precedent and how the current moment ties into, like Reverend Yoshii was talking about this long historical period. Maybe Mr. Collins would be willing to speak on how Ahmed falls within the legacy of the 1968 strike, as well as his own solidarity with Palestinians on campus.
And both of y'all did pretty well as far as I'll try to first respond here because Dr. Ahmed Ali told me to come when she ordered me here. Back in the day, the Central Committee made orders to that do it. So I'm taking orders. So basically, compared to us then at that particular time, we as black students did not see anything, pertaining to us in the books or anything. We felt like we was kind of left out, you know what I mean? So basically at that particular time, we put together 10 demands, which basically all, it was quite simple. Jordan Murray retained his position, Dr. Hare, plus we bring about, he said about 600 students color in, especially from the mission of Fillmore, because we felt a lot of students out there felt intimidated by this academic institution, especially from Fillmore, from Chinatown, from the Nation, and from other corners. So that's the beginning. So basically what happened, to be honest, what happened is that the Black Student Union was instrumental in creating the Thorough Liberation Front because we felt that we had to have allies. We didn't use the term allies, we felt we had to fit 5 people who was in solidarity with us at that particular time. When you walked into the Black Student Union's office, the first thing you saw when you walked in on the wall was the National Liberation Front flag of South Vietnam. We supported the Vietnamese against the imperialists. We let everybody know that. We supported the Vietnamese against the imperialists. So basically from that term, liberation, from the National Liberation Front flag, the people in South Vietnam was fighting against imperialists, U.S. imperialists, which we all knew was nonsense. Talking about the Gulf of Tonkin, a PT boat. A PT boat, can you imagine a PT boat attacked the U.S. destroyer, so they were going to make war on the Vietnamese people. So we decided to organize, to create a central committee, because we felt like our basic problem was that we had leadership, but we didn't have democratic leadership. So we developed a central committee and a presidium. We didn't use the word political because people might get upset when we use that word presidium. And the presidium was basically two people chosen by each central committee member, and they built the base. And most of those were women, because the first vote, women didn't vote for women. So we felt that women had to be part of the presidium, community. So basically at that time, we just always felt for the Palestinians. We didn't have Palestinian students here. We just had Iranian students. We had about 40 Iranian students who went to jail down there supporting the strike and supporting the strike. So at that particular time, we looked at everything in an international perspective. And of course, when we brought together the Thorough Liberation Front, we had to do recruiting. And at that particular time, it was no different at that particular time than what right now the struggle is right now with Ahmed. Ahmed right now has Dr. Abu Dhabi, but she don't have nobody with her. She's supposed to have two people with her. So how can one professor run a whole damn program without any help? So basically, at that particular time, when we was out there fighting, we decided and we demanded that we had some what you would say, sectors would be different sectors, La Raza, Alpha, and all this, because we wouldn't have a program. So basically, what you have right now is a situation where this, into my opinion, this university has become extremely liberalized, type of what you would call a capitalist institution. But at that time, it was more of a school of public. It was more of a public school. Now it's changed. And I think in its purpose right now, they feel because of these liberal institutions, these capitalism, they have a fear of putting together a program which is extremely needed, extremely needed. And when I was last time out here, the first part of the year, it was when the students were on strike. I was with them, talking to them before they did it. And on the first thing on the list was Ahmed. The first thing. And so basically, I think right now the struggle is to do what was supposed to have been done, was promised that to have the teachers, professors, with Ahmed, with this program. And right now, I look up and I see some building. I think it's a gym building out here. I think that's a gym. Can you imagine? He's building a goddamn gym out here and not even having the money for the funds to put two professors to help Professor It's insane. So in my opinion, I think people should start making moves. I mean, they say I'm too north and whatever, but basically, you know what I mean? Basically, what I'm saying, you gotta start doing something. Because right now, last I talked to a comrade Rob, we call each other comrade, because you don't really call them professors or something like that. She says, look, they wearing me out. They wearing me out. So in my opinion, it's time to do something. I don't know what. That was the last, I was here Thursday. That was here Thursday. And me and Vinny Stewart and Lorraine Chu were sitting together talking. So we was looking at this is named the president, Long. He made his speech. And he said that he wasn't going to let any ICE people, Homeland Security people or ICE people come in here and take none of the dreams. He said that. I said, oh, so I looked at the name and said, you think so? If he takes that stand, you know what I mean? He's not going to let nobody know that ICE people, and these ICE people are some dogs, as you know. You got to understand this. The Homeland Security, as you say, these people are almost on their own. I mean, we don't even know who's the head of the Homeland Security. Somebody just threw in there. These jokers got their own plan. It's like the Waffen SS. The chicken farmer in Hitler didn't have no control of the group. So you got to think. In other words, you're up against not only fascism that's actually coming in here now, as you see it. But now, you got to make this man, this president, who said he would stand up against Homeland Security and ICE. They came here for the Dreamers to do what is necessary, and it was on paper to fund two more positions for Army. And so as far as I'm concerned, I mean, people got to start making moves doing something on this. That's priority. The Palestinian struggle right now is something everybody should know about, but the problem is it's suppressed by the media. It's suppressed. People all should know, but they're not about it. It's suppressed. You know what I mean? So this is a situation, I think everybody in the school should, in my opinion now, should start to think about supporting the army because they are under a terrifying attack. I think the General Union of Palestinian students only has one president. Are there any other places, any other schools?
we're the
only one there. So they're under attack. This is the only place they got right now. To what they have to do. Hopefully, we got the support because of this school's what we call their reputation. But in a way, this school right now is like the Haiti of the United States. Like, you know the history of Haiti. Everybody knows what Haiti, right? After 1804, when they defeated the British, the French, and the Spanish, they said, you can't never get ever. They've been under attack for 208 years. Right now, they're under attack. Right now. So, I don't have this much right?
I think that at this moment we should take a short break. Yeah. So we're going to take a short break of about 15 minutes. So we'll be reconvening here about 10:30 minutes after.
Stop it.
I know. I can't.